Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Amaya Brooks, 17, was a black teenager with ebony skin, a thin face framed by tightly curled hair that she often wore tied back, and a deep, peaceful yet intelligent gaze. She had this strange aura that effortlessly imposed silence around her, as if her calm were a form of silent resistance to the tumult of the world. Since childhood, she had learned a brutal truth: to be black, poor, and orphaned was to exist on the margins of others' gaze. She had never been given the luxury of simply being a child. She had seen too early the violence of ruptures, the death of her parents in a car accident, the cold hands of social services, the temporary homes where she shared a room with other lost children, the looks of pity mixed with fear. And above all, this constant sensation of being a tolerated guest in a society that did not understand her and would not make an effort to do so. At the age of 12, she spent her afternoons in the public libraries of Charleston, simply to escape the cacophony of the shelters. She found refuge there among the dusty shelves, teaching herself what school did not teach: ancient strategies of war, Eastern philosophy, human psychology, economics. She read to understand the world, not to belong to it, but to no longer be at the mercy of others. It was there that one day, an old man discreetly observed him for several minutes. Harold Whitmore, an aging, eccentric billionaire with a reputation as a reclusive misanthrope, had come to the library on a nostalgic whim. He was surprised to see this young girl in rags reading attentively The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Intrigued, he unceremoniously approaches her. "Do you understand what you read?" "Yes. Better than what I'm fed," she replied, without looking up. He burst into a hearty laugh, a little rusty with age. This was the beginning of an uninterrupted exchange lasting more than 3 hours. They talked about strategy, solitude, social intelligence, and even justice. Amaya stood up to him without arrogance, with a lucidity that unsettled him. She wasn't trying to seduce him, impress him, or even convince him of anything. She was, simply, and that was what struck him. This girl asked for nothing, but deserved everything. Touched by this unlikely encounter, Harold quietly began taking steps. After investigating her situation, he called his lawyers and, with the approval of a judge, obtained legal custody. This move caused a scandal in certain circles of the city, where whispers spread about this eccentric old white man who adopted a black girl with no family. But Harold had never been one to pay attention to gossip. He installed Amaya in a wing of the Whitmore Manor, a majestic neoclassical building surrounded by geometric gardens, babbling fountains, and a private library containing over 10,000 rare books. This mansion, located away from the city, became the setting for Amaya's second life. That's when everything changed. Every morning, she received a tailor-made education: advanced mathematics, the history of civilizations, rhetoric, ancient languages, business management, business ethics. Harold devoted time to her as a teacher would train an heir. He didn't treat her like a child to be saved, but like a mind to be sharpened. He taught her to play chess, to read contracts, to detect the manipulations behind smiles. He never called her daughter, and she never called him grandfather, but between them, a strange complicity had grown, one of rich silences, knowing glances, and long conversations by the fireside. He taught him one lesson above all. In this world, you will never be given your place. So be the one who can't be ignored. During these 5 years, Amaya grew in strength and grace. She learned understated elegance, not of finery, but of attitude, quiet intelligence, and patience. She understood that true power is never noisy. It is sure of itself, even in silence. But when Harold died suddenly at 82 from a heart attack in his sleep, it was as if the manor itself held its breath. And suddenly, all those who had ignored her until then, the Whitmore relatives, the old associates, the society journalists, remembered this strange, silent, black girl, who lived in the east wing of the manor. They knew nothing about her, but they knew what she now represented: a threat. The vast Whitmore Manor living room, with its walls covered in carved woodwork and ancestral portraits, seemed to resonate with the weight of generations. The antique furniture, Louis XVI armchairs, Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers, added to the atmosphere a frozen scent of old-fashioned prestige and calculated coldness. But today, it was filled with a completely different scent: greed. Since the early hours of the morning, the most opportunistic members of the Whitmore family had taken over the place. Some had not bothered to come to the funeral the day before, but all were there told reading of the will. Their attitude betrayed their true interest. They had not come to mourn an old uncle, but to claim their share of his empire. There was, at the center of this worldly masquerade, Samantha Whitmore. She wore a strict black suit, too luxurious to be sincere, accompanied by oversized sunglasses that she hadn't taken off inside. A former television host turned aging influencer, she wore a face frozen by plastic surgery and an expression of cruel superiority. She wasn't there to pretend. In her mind, all this was rightfully his. "If there is any justice in this world, I'm leaving here with the keys to the estate," she whispered to her cousin as she entered. By his side, Robert Whitmore, his younger brother, in a tailored suit and steely gaze, tapped distractedly on his state-of-the-art phone. A self-proclaimed entrepreneur, he had failed at 4 successive startups but maintained the posture of a budding tycoon. He had always despised Harold, whom he considered an outdated old man, but today he had donned a Rolex watch and a dark tie, just to play the part of the affected nephew. Not far from there, Cynthia Reynolds, the cousin by marriage, was puffing on her e-cigarette at the window. Married to a senator from the conservative South, she was content to scrutinize others with the cold gaze of those who believe that political power is worth more than blood. Her presence was not emotional, she had come to keep an eye on what might escape her. It was a gathering of silently predatory suitors, each already imagining what to do with the manor, the business, the old paintings. They spoke to each other with mean smiles, exchanging pleasantries while waiting for what they believed to be a mere formality. But when the door opened slowly and Amaya entered, the room temperature seemed to drop by 1 degree. Dressed in a simple black dress, without jewelry or heels, her hair carefully pulled back in a tight bun, she contrasted sharply with the ostentation of the others. In her hands she held a small, worn brown leather notebook, the kind you find in old bookstores. She moved slowly, without embarrassment, without haste. But what struck most was the heavy silence which fell upon his entrance, quickly broken by poorly concealed whispers. "I don't understand why she's here. She's not even family. She's Harold's little protégé, isn't she? An orphan? A maid? A mistake, if you ask me." Amaya heard them, she heard them all, but her face remained impassive. This wasn't the first time white adults had tried to reduce her to a lack of legitimacy. She knew what those looks meant: disbelief, hostility, fear of losing to an intruder. She calmly approached the large table in the center of the room and took a seat away, on a chair slightly offset from the others. No one invited him to come closer, she didn't need it. His gaze held neither fear, nor anger, nor even sadness, just worn-out patience, the one for people who have waited too long, taken too much, watched too much. She knew she didn't need to shout or justify herself, time would speak for her. At 10 o'clock sharp, as if obeying an invisible clock, the heavy wooden door of the living room opened. An instinctive silence fell in the room, as if everyone felt that the long-awaited, or dreaded, moment had finally begun. Master Jonathan Griffin, the family notary for over 2 decades, entered. A man of medium height but imposing posture, he wore a perfectly tailored black suit, an impeccable gray shirt, and a sober tie. On his arm, a black leather briefcase, whose clasps shone in the golden light of the crystal chandelier. He greeted briefly, without smiling. "Hello everyone." Without waiting for an answer, he walked over to the unlit fireplace, where he placed his briefcase on a low table with calculated slowness. Each gesture seemed ritualized, as if honoring the solemn weight of what was about to be revealed. He opened the briefcase, took out a thick, sealed document, placed it in front of him, and then gravely put on his glasses. He let his gaze slide over the assembly, tense, eager faces, disguised under masks of polite indignation. Amaya, silent in an armchair slightly set back, kept her hands crossed on her knees. She didn't move. She listened with absolute attention, without blinking. Master Griffin cleared his throat. His voice, when it rose, was steady, clear, and without any apparent emotion. I will read the last will and testament of Mr. Harold Whitmore, written and recorded in the presence of 2 witnesses and legally validated according to the laws of the state. An invisible shudder ran through the room. A tense silence closed in around the group, like a cage. Griffin began reading. I, Harold Benjamin Whitmore, being of sound mind, make this will with my own hand, desiring to transmit my estate according to my conscience, and not according to expectations. He paused. Samantha's eyes had already narrowed in suspicion. To my niece, Samantha Whitmore, whose elegance is equal to her selfishness, and who has often asked me, how much is the domain worth, but never again, how are you, I bequeath. He looked up, slowly, almost with a hint of suppressed pleasure. My personal collection of mirrors. May she continue to admire what she cherishes most, herself. A gasp rippled through the room. Samantha stood there, her lips parted. Her complexion, beneath the too light foundation, turned gray. She tried to laugh, a dry, nervous laugh. What is this nonsense? But no one answered. And especially not Master Griffin, who immediately continued. To my nephew Robert Whitmore, whose ambition is matched only by his dissembling, and who attempted to sell me shares in my own company, overvalued and disguised for his personal gain, I bequeath. He took a small envelope from the briefcase, marked with a note in black ink. This fold containing only one thing, the word ethics. Let him finally discover what he has always run away from. Muffled laughter escaped from a corner of the room, probably from the domestic staff who had seen and heard everything, yet had never been able to speak. Robert, livid, clenched his fists on his knees, his knuckles white. His gaze glared at Griffin, then slid over to Amaya. He understood, something unexpected was happening. Then, Master Griffin paused. But this was no ordinary silence. It was one of those silences that seem to stretch through the air like a rope being pulled taut, until it snaps. He slowly removed his glasses, placed them on the back of the leather-bound folder, and then looked up at the gathering. His gaze rested on each one for a moment, Samantha, Robert, Cynthia, before finally settling on Amaya, still motionless, straight, hands crossed on her knees. His voice, when it rose again, was slower, almost solemn. And to Amaya Brooks. A slight movement swept through the room. Heads turned, brows furrowed, jaws tightened. Who never raised his voice, but whose every word counted, who shared my readings, my silences and my doubts, who accompanied me until my last breath without ever expecting a reward, without ever betraying its nature or claiming its place. He paused again, then his voice lowered, deeper. I bequeath all my wealth, including all of my assets, majority stake in Whitmore Industries, the family mansion, his artwork and private collections, as well as my properties in Paris, Rome, Seoul and Buenos Aires. The last word fell into the room like a stone into a bottomless pit. A thick, brutal silence. One could have heard a pin drop on the Persian rug. The frozen faces were now cracked masks. Necks craned toward the notary, or toward Amaya, who still hadn't moved. She stared calmly at an abstract point at the back of the room, far from the human tumult. It was as if she had detached herself from the scene, like an actress weary of the theater of vanities. Then, the predictable explosion came. This is a joke. Samantha jumped up, throwing her chair against the polished floor. Her shrill voice cut through the air. A girl who came out of nowhere? An orphan black? Is that it, the heiress to the Whitmore empire? She doesn't have no rights. She has not even the name. His voice trembled with fury, but also, in truth, with panic. She looked around, hoping someone would support her, that common sense would return, that this social nightmare would end. But no one spoke. Even Robert looked down, pale. Cynthia rubbed her temples, as if fighting back a sudden migraine. Griffin, didn't even blink. This will was drawn up with complete clarity, signed before witnesses, registered, notarized, and validated by the legal authorities. It is irrevocable. He emphasized the word, like a cleaver. It reflects the full, complete and lucid will of the late Mr. Whitmore. Samantha staggered forward, as if the force of the law had slapped her in the face. This is a betrayal, a humiliation. This is not what the family would have wanted. Master Griffin slowly looked up at her, cold and sharp as a scalpel. Maybe because you are not his family. The sentence hung in the air. A quiet murmur spread. A sigh of relief even came from a butler in the shadows of the corridor. And in the midst of all this, Amaya remained motionless. Not a word. Not a smile. Not a tear. Her eyes, dark and vast, stared into an imaginary space, perhaps a memory, perhaps a vanished face, but certainly not the room full of hypocrisy and anger around her. His silence was not submission. It was assolent victory. The victory of the one who had been ignored, despised, minimized, and who, without raising her voice, had just received everything. Not just money, not just property. More recognition, legitimacy, power. And the most heartbreaking thing for those around him, is that she had never needed it to exist. The days following the reading of the will were a real media earthquake. The biggest press titles, from tabloids to business journals, eagerly seized on it. The mysterious black heiress to a white empire. Amaya Brooks, orphan becomes billionaire. Harold Whitmore's final coup, a fortune left to a stranger. Silent, invisible, until the world is forced to look at her. News networks vied for archival footage of the day of the funeral, in which Amaya, dressed in black, head bowed, walked behind Harold's coffin. The contrast between her discreet posture and the flamboyance of the official Whitmores was as fascinating as it was disturbing. Some commentators described her as manipulative, others as a figure of social rupture. Internet users quickly took a position. On social media, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Justice for Amaya, hashtag Pawn Error, hashtag Whitmore Revolution. During this time, Samantha Whitmore, humiliated and furious, tried to fighten the only scale it understood, public. She hired an army of lawyers to contest the will, alleging that her uncle had been influenced by a dominant psychological presence, a code phrase to avoid saying what she really thought, that a young black woman could not be the rightful heir to an empire built by a white man. She gave interviews on morning talk shows, playing the loving betrayed niece card, evoking sweetened childhood memories of Harold, even though she hadn't seen him in years. I think he was manipulated. I don't want to say by whom, but I'll let you guess. But very quickly, the tide turned. For every insinuating statement Samantha made, a video, a photo, or a testimony emerged to contradict her. A servant at the manor, interviewed anonymously, said, "Samantha? She's only been here twice in 10 years. The first time was to ask for an advance on her inheritance. The second time was to organize an Instagram photo shoot in front of the mansion." Internet users went wild. Satirical montages multiplied. Samantha's frozen face became a meme. She was mocked, ridiculed, and ultimately, forgotten. During this time, Amaya Brooks, she, refused any interview. Not a public appearance, not a statement. Just a terse statement from Mr. Griffin's office, confirming that the estate had been transferred according to law. And in this media storm, his silence became a strategy, a symbol of elegance and mastery. As the cameras searched for her, she was working. She requested a confidential meeting with the directors of Whitmore Industries, in the central tower of Charleston's financial district. Most expected a quick sale, a transfer of wealth to a Swiss bank, or at least a takeover by an outside firm. But Amaya surprised them. Sitting alone in front of 10 men in suits, she opened a leather notebook, the same one she had been holding on the day the will was read, and spoke to them calmly. "My tutor taught me that an empire built without conscience collapses sooner or later. I'm not here to squander what he left behind, nor to buy myself a yacht. I'm here to put this house back on its feet. In my own way." She kept her gaze fixed on them. "My watchword will be integrity. Those who want to continue in opacity are free to leave now." 4 members of the executive committee resigned within a week. She appointed new, young, competent faces from diverse backgrounds. She ordered a complete audit of offshore activities. She severed ties with certain dubious partners. But Amaya didn't stop there. She returned to the manor, now empty of its former vultures, and transformed the West Wing, formerly closed to the public, in an education center for young orphans. There were reading rooms, digital studios, a sensory garden, and tutors in residence. The place was not a school, but a place to reconnect with oneself, a second chance. Then she announced the creation of the Whitmore Scholarship for Awakening, reserved for African American students wishing to train in the fields of law, medicine, engineering, or the arts. Finally, in a sober statement, she launched the Harold and Amaya Foundation, an international project for equitable access to knowledge, working in disadvantaged neighborhoods in the United States, but also in Haiti, Senegal, and India. She refused to use her name alone. Nothing that I am today exists without what he transmitted to me. Critics waited for the misstep. It never came. She was calm, visionary, silent, and formidably structured. Amaya Brooks, the invisible orphan, had not simply inherited an empire. She had transformed him. And for the first time, in the steel towers of Charleston, power bore the face of a young, silent, upright black woman who had never asked for her position, but had won it without a word. A year later, the Great Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art de New York shone brightly. Sparkling chandeliers were reflected in antique mirrors, gilt work, crystal bowls, and haute couture gowns worn by guests from around the world. It was the annual evening of the Foundation for Inclusive Education, and among the patrons, philanthropists, politicians, scientists, artists, and entrepreneurs gathered that evening, one name resonated louder than all the others. Amaya Brooks. As she appeared at the top of the steps leading to the central stage, a murmur ran through the audience. All eyes turned to this young woman of barely 18, who exuded a quiet grace, almost supernatural. She wore ivory dress, long, flowing, with an elegance without artifice. Her hair was braided into a crown, carefully and soberly tied up, dotted with small pearly beads, like a discreet reminder of her origins and her rise. No ostentatious jewelry, no garish makeup. Her only luxury was her presence. When she reached the stage, the spotlights adjusted on her. The applause, at first polite, became louder. Not because she had sought admiration, but because she imposed it without demanding it. He was given a crystal trophy, carved in the shape of an open book. A carefully chosen symbol, honorary award for outstanding contribution to equitable education and social justice. She nodded her thanks, then approached the microphone. For a moment, she observed the crowd, calm and impassive. In the front rows, CEOs, celebrities, government officials. But Amaya wasn't looking at anyone in particular. She was looking beyond. And then she spoke. In a calm, slightly deep voice, surprisingly assured for her age, she said, "I wasn't meant to inherit anything in this world." A silence fell. Those who knew his story immediately understood the weight of this sentence. Not a name. Not a home. Not a future. And yet, a man saw me. Not my color. Not my scars. Not my record. Just me. Some people in the room looked down, embarrassed, aware of their own blindness. To all the invisible children, to those the world ignores, categorizes, stigmatizes, or erases, you are precious. Even if no one tells you. Even if you have to wait a long time to be seen. Keep learning. Keep dreaming. Keep building. Because one day, I promise you, the world will realize it. She paused, then added, almost in a whisper. And that day, it won't be a revenge. It will be a rebirth. The whole room stood up. A standing ovation. Not for a teenage billionaire, but for a righteous soul, a conscience, a voice that spoke on behalf of the forgotten with a gentle, but unwavering force. Samantha, she, was not in the room. After the public humiliation, the lost lawsuits, the accumulated debts, and the broken media contracts, she had left the networks. It was said that she now lived in a small Midwestern town, far from the spotlight she had so sought. A faded figure, swallowed by the void she herself had created. The Whitmore Manor, he was unrecognizable. The once closed heavy doors now opened every morning to dozens of children, orphans, refugees, survivors of the system. There was laughter, hurried footsteps in the corridors, and passionate conversations around books, computers, paintings, and projects. The library, where it all began for Amaya, had become the beating heart of the house. A large fresco had been painted there, representing Harold and Amaya, side by side, facing a sea of children reaching out towards knowledge. And Amaya? She remained true to herself. No villa in Miami, no private jet, no celebrity magazine. She continued to study, to read, to write. She surrounded herself with brilliant minds and curious children. She spoke little. But when she did, the world was listening. Invisible to the eyes of those who can only see the flashy. Unforgettable for those who know how to look beyond appearances.